Good afternoon, everyone. This is Shannon Scott with Grave Talks, your taphophile host, pushing the weather envelope, the story envelope here in New Orleans in Holt Cemetery, which, if you didn't know that there were modern buildings in the background and 19th century lampposts, this might be West Africa. And the way we have a lot of personal family-made headstones, that very kind of just, molded earth, clay, kind of headstone, which always shows the outpouring of love and the family respect. And, I just kind of wandered in here. I'd been here before there was a wall put up around the place, and it's been years, but it's a really interesting cemetery, very different and, kind of off the beaten path, not completely touristy. But there were some notable jazz figures buried in the Holt Cemetery, and along the way you always find, interesting burials, interesting burial pottery, objects. The African tradition, really it's about communicating with the dead, graveside, remembering the dead to a certain point and degree, and there are a lot of traditions around staying in touch with the dead. One interesting headstone that I found along the path was that of Robert Charles with an actual machine gun kind of infused. It's a stylized, probably kid's toy. So this is a modern artist rendition, laid here in the old, probably burial site with some objects of memory celebration. But apparently he in 1900 or somewhere thereabouts was engaged by policemen in an arrest, and ultimately in the foot chase it looks like he shot 25 people and he murdered 7 or killed 7 of them, and it became a major race riot in New Orleans. And I don't know, just it's kind of wild, like what you find in a headstone. So I'm almost laughing out of nerves there that such a human engagement ever occurred, but as we know, they do. So I had to share something with you guys because I just found it wandering to the edge of the cemetery. I came over here to see what the border of the place might be about, because there's like a little canal. As you know, it's a science, it's an art, well-established thing, funneling water around New Orleans to keep places like cemeteries drier. And along the edge of the canal, which we could say feed these trees, the roots, right? So we see the cyclicalness of life expressed here in a way, the constant food of water flowing into these roots of these trees. And so, as I was just hanging out here, looking around, per New Orleans, per, Africanism, I find this ancient live oak and a voodoo doll nailed to the tree. No, I did not put this here. It was not a gimmick. It just happened to be in the place. And notice how it's also nailed along these feeding vines of the live oak. So yeah, it's very much someone asking for something for either the dead or themselves, kind of using the meaning of all this connection to the earthly and the spiritual realms for some kind of goodness, we hope. But again, don't know the intent of the person that placed that there, but I just thought, wow, to actually find that in a New Orleans cemetery, and also, in a cemetery with a lot of the African American tradition behind it, seems genuine. Sometimes in the cemeteries you find objects like that are just kind of placed by amateurs who, are latching onto something that is just trendy. But I feel like that has maybe some gravitas to it, if that makes sense. Anyway, King Bolden, the jazz musician, is buried out here in an unmarked grave. And bear in mind, I'm not an expert in jazz. I love jazz. Love jazz of all kinds. I've been listening to it since I got to New Orleans. Love blues. Just love music. And I had no idea that King Bolden was buried out here. Again, this was just a turn off a road, trying to find a cemetery that I had some basic memory of, in my mind, and boom, there it was. Although modern buildings have gone up around it since I was last here, and some walls. But King Bolden inspired King Oliver, who was Louis Armstrong's mentor. Winston Marsalis, I think, referred to him as one of the fathers of jazz, as have many jazz experts and jazz journalists and jazz authors. He was a cornetist who was born an orphan, and from what I've read from other fine researchers, and thank you for making me sound, semi-good out here, guys. Many of you on the internet are kind of nameless, but, you've done all the hard work, the real stuff. But I like to talk about it and share it with others, so if you don't mind. But it's been said that he played like a looser ragtime with little blues edge, and that his Bolden band had the first brass instruments, and his heyday was from 1900 to 1907. And here we see the marker to the unmarked grave site somewhere beyond here, to Charles Joseph Buddy Bolden, known as King Bolden. There's a great quote here down here on the bottom by Jelly Roll Morton. The blowingest man since Gabriel. We see that antique horn there. That's amazing. Teapot, old shoe. Looks like some wings in flight there. Air Force emblem. And his great-grandson, who I don't know much about, but he's a New Orleans jazz guy around the area now, but he only had one son in his lifetime, King Bolden. And although he did lay down recordings on cylinders sometime between 1900 and 1907, those have all been lost. There is no written recording of his music, he didn't write anything down. He played and learned everything by ear. He infused a lot of gospel and ragtime and just real street sounds into kind of this infused sound that became Jass, or as they now call it, jazz. And so that's partly why I wanted to share, some of the African view here, even the African kind of landscape, the voodoo doll, because it's a music from Africa, it's a music of this world, maybe the next world, but I think he was kind of an infusionist. He played really loud, boisterous music, it's been said, and that term hambone, that sound, we get a little, that's kind of what he's credited to creating ultimately, although I don't know if he knew that term in his own lifetime, hambone, but it became connected to him or credited to him in some ways. I think it's just interesting that King Oliver, who ended up in Savannah, Georgia, really at the tail end of his career in life, and was living on West Broad Street, acting as a janitor somewhere, and it seems like it's a little bit mysterious. Like Louis Armstrong, who King Oliver mentored, came through Savannah once and saw him in this kind of piss poor state, and gave King Oliver some money to just kind of get by for a while. But not a happy ending there. But yeah, I think it's interesting that King Bolden here inspired King Oliver. But this is also not a story of a happy ending. Around 1907, and he died at 54 years of age, so he's really, 87, 97, 1907. So at 30 years of age, he's effectively diagnosed with dementia. It seems like becomes paranoid schizophrenia, and there's an alcoholism factor, so it's just, bad. He's medicating because of the problems. So he was institutionalized in an asylum. He spent the rest of his life in an asylum. So from 1907 until his death in 1931 at 54 years of age, he was committed. And I don't know if those chapters are recorded or if, he had any piece there or remained musical in any way. I don't know if that's known. But, it's just kind of almost ethereal, like the music he created. It's like it came from the air, it came from the sun, it came from the smell of the grass, it came from the scenery. You know, those are very spiritual ideas. They're very musical ideas. They're ethereal. They're spiritual. So I think it's fascinating that, you know, there's nothing recorded that he made. There's nothing written down that he wrote. It just lives infused in others. It just lives in the spirits of others. That's how it got passed down. And I think that's how really most of humanity or civilization ultimately lives on, right? You know, it's almost like the written down history, the music we get, the art we get, the storytelling we get. It's like those are just little snippets that are really solid and juicy, you know, but most of it escapes the fingers, right? Like water just flowing through the hands or the fingers. But anyway, that's just my little take on Holt Cemetery here in New Orleans before the big rain. And a little, you know, bitty on King Bolden here in an unmarked grave. His spirit out there just blowing in the marsh grass and the sweet grass, and also in the spinning blades of, what do we call those? Not windmills. I can't think of what they're called. They look like flowers. They spin around in the garden. Sorry, I'm not very poetic right now, but hope you guys are doing good out there. We've got more storytelling coming from New Orleans cemeteries today and tomorrow, so be on the watch out. And please check out my YouTube channel, Grave Talks. You guys have a great day.